Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thank you so much for being with me today. I'm going to be talking about from MongoDB to mobile in 15 minutes. Currently, I'm working as community manager for mobile at MongoDB, and I'll tell you about me a little bit more with photographs. Okay, so about me, I'm proud to say that I'm a self-taught Android developer. I got scholarship from Google in collaboration with Audacity in 2017 and 2018. So we were a group of people working together, helping each other with projects, with question and answers and everything. So these are some of the community highlights from there. And I'm also lead organizer for Google Developer Group's Dublin chapter and Women Tech Makers Dublin chapter. I recently started MongoDB user groups in Dublin, so if you have any topic that you want to know about, please feel free to reach out to me. I live with my husband in Dublin, and we both love to travel. And if I'm not working or sleeping, I do painting and cross-stitching and art and crafts. So before I begin, I really want to thank these three wonderful ladies. Helen Lewis, who introduced me to DevOps. I was not aware of the conference. And Helen Scott, she was so kind to guide me through how to create my abstract and speaker coach me. And this is my very first international conference at a stage like this. So I was panicking when I got the acceptance. So Rita Rodriguez, who is the head of content at MongoDB, she encouraged me to accept, and I'm so proud I did. I met so many wonderful people here. So yeah, happy to be here. And what are the odds? Tonight only, my UK visa expires. Okay, the video is not showing up. Okay, it did. Sorry about that. Before I play the video, there's a little backstory behind this. So when I joined MongoDB in December 2019, I joined as a support engineer for Realm. MongoDB acquired Realm database back in April 2019. And I was the first mobile engineer they hired for supporting the Realm legacy customers. So at that time, I was not able to get a chance to do the development that I learned back in 2017 and 18. So 5 months ago, I joined developer relations as a community manager for mobile, and that gave me enough time to come back to development. And this is my knowledge sharing session with you. Being a community manager, I need to know what the community is struggling with, what they're experiencing. So this was my attempt to kind of experiment with MongoDB and Realm both and help share my learnings with the community with what are the best practices, what are the gotchas, what you can avoid, and what you should follow. So I'll play this video now. I promise this was not planned. I know this is lunch afterwards. So when you start an application, it asks user for authentication. Authentication is important because it recognizes what user is trying to access the app. And then if you have data to persist locally, it gets persisted with that user object. So next, it's going to show you locations in New York. Whatever location you will choose, or whatever cuisine you will choose, it will show you the list of restaurants in a recycler view list. The video is a little slow. I'm so sorry about that. So you select a location. You look what restaurant you want to go to. It displays the food, the name, and the address. These are two separate Android devices, and the same application is playing on both of them. So you select a restaurant, say you have a friend who's also looking at the app. So you select the restaurant, you see what the address is. You add a review to the restaurant, and that will sync to the other device as well, along with the username that submitted that review. Say, for example, you go offline and you don't have access to internet, you can still make local changes to your application. And once you're back online, the changes will be synced back. So now I'm going to turn off the Wi-Fi off of one of the emulators. So these are two Android devices. Not necessarily those will be the two Android only. So you can have iOS as well, or you can have a desktop as well. It's going to be the same logic on all of them. I'm sorry about that. This is kind of Wi-Fi. So this will not sync because the device is offline. and now when the device comes back online, this is going to sync to the other device. So it also depends on how much amount of data you're going to be syncing. If there is a lot of amount that you have written, it's going to take some time to sync back. And depending on if the same writes are made at the same time, there is conflict resolution algorithm on the server side that's going to check what writes were made first, and we're going to be sync accordingly. Oh my God. Sorry about the glitch in between. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about today is what is Realm database, what is MongoDB Atlas, how is this syncing happening, what is offline persistence, and what are the next steps we can take. So the high-level app components here. How many of here are mobile developers? And how many of you have used MongoDB? Oh, a lot of you. That's amazing. So high-level app components here are 2 Android devices. So these can be either Android or iOS or your desktop app. And then we have Realm Sync feature, which is we are using, and then MongoDB Atlas, which is the data application platform. Realm Sync is one of the application service of Atlas that we are using here. A high-level cloud architecture here is on the Atlas. MongoDB Atlas on the cloud, and then we have application services, which includes functions, triggers, data access control permissions, data API, GraphQL, and Realm Sync. There are more than that, but I've listed only a few of here. So there's web hosting and authentication as well. So if you have data in Atlas, you can use all of these services on the data over there. And then you have Realm SDKs on your mobile. So we have 7 SDKs that you can choose from. You create your application, and you use any of those features. You use sync feature. You sync the data from your application to Atlas, and then you perform functions or triggers on that data there in the Atlas. Going forward, these are the app building components that are used in the restaurant app. Realm SDKs, there are 7 of them available. I'm using Realm Java. Realm Sync feature I'm using, there are sync types and sync mode, which I'm going to explain you next. And then on the Atlas application services, I'm using authentication. So sync modes is important here. There are 2 modes, development mode on and generate schema mode. So what happens is, if you are developing your application from scratch, you don't have anything in MongoDB, you don't know what that is, you can use any of the tech stack that you want to use. You develop your application from your mobile end, Java, Kotlin, or anything, and then you update your schemas as and what you want. You use the sync feature, and then once you run your application, the whole data, the whole schema is going to sync to the cloud. So the Realm object models, there is a utility in between that's going to convert your object models to the MongoDB document model. You don't have to do any logic behind that. Even if you go offline, Realm has inbuilt up capability to check that the device is offline or online, and it's going to rerun the code itself to save your data to the cloud. You don't have to implement any additional logic to that. So that is when you go from mobile to MongoDB. On the other end is MongoDB to mobile, which is I'm using in the application. So that is generate schema mode. You have a lot of data in Atlas, and you want to create a mobile application out of that. So there is a utility on MongoDB, generate schema. So you can configure the collection that you want to sync to your mobile application. You have a lot of documents there. MongoDB is schema-less. You can have that schema-less, but Realm conforms to schema. So your schema on the mobile application has to match the schema on the Atlas. If it does not match, you cannot sync your data there. So you can sample as many documents as you can, like 10,000K, so that it generates the schema on the equality of the highest number of documents. And once that you generate the schema there, it will generate all the 7 SDKs for you. So you just need to copy that schema from there to your mobile application, implement your logic there, and sync the data from Atlas to your mobile. But there are 2 things you have to be careful. Development mode is only used for development applications. Once your application is ready for production, you should switch off the development mode. What happens is if a third-party person gets access to your application, it can make changes to your schema, and that's not going to end well for you. On the other hand, on the second point is when you want to make changes to your schema, you should do the changes from the cloud, on the cloud UI, which I will show you how to do that. Or you do changes for development mode on. That is a little tricky path to go to. So always, if you want to make schema changes, do so on the cloud side. Now next is sync types. Say you chose that you want to go from mobile, MongoDB to mobile. What is the next step? Then you chose what kind of sync you want. Do you want to sync all of the data to your mobile, or do you want to sync some part of the data to your device? Depending on what your use case is. Your data on Atlas is going to be a lot of documents. How do you partition those documents so that the user who authenticates gets the data that is specific to that user? So in this case, I'm using restaurant data. The restaurant can have cities. Currently, I have only New York City there. So say, for example, when I expand this application further, I get San Francisco, or I get London, I get Austin. How will I divide that data so that not all of the data gets synced to the device? So that is with partition sync, partition key. You define a key there. The value of that key is going to partition your data into multiple collections, and whatever value you will provide from your mobile, it's going to sync the data only that value to the device. So this partition key will be mandatory key in all of your documents. It will send the request there, whatever values you give, and it will check which document has that value, and it's only going to sync those documents to your device. What happens with flexible sync is it offers you the flexibility. You do not have to sync all data. Like I'm syncing New York, the whole restaurants that are there in New York. I'm syncing Manhattan, I'm syncing Bronx, I'm syncing Brooklyn. But if I want to sync that I want only Chinese food in Bronx, I can define those queryable fields in the flexible sync, and I can sync only those restaurants that serves chicken and that are available in Bronx location. So you can define up to 10 queryable fields in flexible sync, like it's a query-based sync. Whatever query you will perform, it will sync only that data. Currently, flexible sync is in preview mode available, and partition sync which is GA, and I'm using partition sync in the restaurant app. So what is next? Next is defining the permissions. You chose the sync mode, you chose the sync type. How do you control that what user is accessing? How do you control that access of data to the user? So you defined read and write permissions in the form of JSON expressions. So these are some samples there. What do you want? You want to give access to all partitions, the read and write to all partitions, true for both, that is the second value there, open brackets, close brackets, or if you want to give access to only public partitions. So you can define those JSON expressions this way. Say, for example, you have complex permission schemas, and that cannot be defined using the JSON expressions. So you can write functions over there. The functions will evaluate a Boolean variable, and whatever value that comes there will give access to the user to. Say, for example, this is calling the can read partition. The function will be defined on the server. You can have a switch case there, or whatever is your use case, and then you can see what value is you want the user to access to. You can define values, evaluate the Boolean expression through there. On the other hand, for flexible, the permissions are determined by session role. The session role is stored in the custom user object. So this happens when the user authenticates. The session role consists of a name and apply when expression. So this is an example where only admin has the read-write permissions, while user has only the write permissions. So when are these permissions evaluated? When a user authenticates, the permissions are checked on the server side. Realm will evaluate these expressions. It will check whether the user has access to the partition they are reading or writing, and it will throw an error if the user does not have access. Now let's build. So this is how you create a cluster. You go to realm.mongodb.com. It's an easy follow-to instructions to create your account. And once you create your account, it will ask you to build a database. It is like 2-3 minutes process. So I've recorded this video, which I will show you. You build a database. You chose the MO cluster, which is the shared version. You can define the cloud provider and region you want to choose. Is this visible? I think the visibility. The speed decreases when I... Is the screen size okay at the back? You can change the cluster name to whatever you would like. You would need MongoDB 4.4 if, and above if you are using the sync feature. It will take a little time to create the cluster. You create a username and password so that the cluster can identify you who is accessing it. And MongoDB provides a MongoDB Compass utility, which is a GUI tool which you can use, authenticate through this username and password, and you can view your collections from there. Or you can authenticate with Mongo Shell. You need this username and password, and you can access your collections or insert data using the MongoDB query language from the Mongo Shell. And then you identify your IP, that which machine is trying to access. Anything which is outside of this IP range cannot access your data on the cluster. So this is going to take some time. Once this is created, this is going to look like this. So what happens is I don't have any data in Atlas at the moment. So Atlas also provides a utility where you can load sample data set and you can play around with whatever comes available. So when you load this data, this is going to look like this. It's again 6-7 minutes process once you load it. It's 337 MB data size that is showing. You can browse the collections from here, whatever collections got loaded in the database. These are the all data set that are available. So if you want to experiment with MongoDB Compass, you want to experiment with MongoDB Shell, you can use this data set. Or if you want to experiment with functions and triggers on Atlas, the data set is available to you and you can use it. So this is the one that I'm using for the restaurant application. I'm sorry, this is a little slow, but once it shows what collections are available, I'm sure it's good the next step. So this is the data that is available there. Now this data is going to get synced to your mobile application. I'm going to check now how it's going to get synced. And if you want to run any queries, say for example, you can use, if you want to check what restaurants are available in Brooklyn, say for example, you can run the MongoDB query language on the Data Explorer. And then check the name of the restaurants there or cuisines there. So this is, I'm going to show you only Brooklyn ones. What happens with Realm now? You want to sync this. You will create a Realm app on the cloud. So you go to the Realm tab there, and it will offer you some templates that you can choose from. Whatever tech stack you are following, you can choose the template that you want. Or you can start to build from scratch. I'm using start to build from scratch for the restaurant application. So these are the templates that are given to you that you can choose. I'll be choosing from scratch. So you link the data source, which is your cluster name, and then you define the application name. Then you select the region. It is recommended that your cluster region and your application region is the same. These are the guides provided to you. If you want to experiment with any of the features, you have handy guides to follow to show you how to use that feature. So I'll close it here. And now the next step is to enable the authentication. So these are all the multiple authentication providers that you can choose from. Anonymous is only should be used if you have data that is okay to publicly accessed by any user. But otherwise, if you have user-sensitive data, it is recommended that you use proper authentication provider. For this one, I'm using email password. So I will automatically confirm user, have a empty function. I'm not defining any function here. But you can, if you are moving the application to production, this should be having a confirmation and a function to reset. So this also offers you an option to review your draft before you deploy. If this becomes too much cumbersome, there's an option to switch this off and disable. But if you don't deploy, you will lose changes. So always remember to deploy the changes when you create the application. So let's see how the schema looks like. There's no schema yet. Why there is no schema? Because the Realm application we created, it is not aware what is there in the Atlas. So we'll have to make this aware by configuring those collections. So you don't have to configure all of them. You can use any database and configure that collection. So I'm choosing the restaurant one. I'm using the generate schema utility here. I'll sample the maximum number of documents I can. And this is going to look at all those documents and create the best match of schema from there. It will take 1 or 2 minutes to create. OK, so this is created. I'll save the draft. And now you will see it generated the schema to copy to the SDK to your mobile as well. So that is available in the SDK tab, Realm Object Models. So you can choose whatever tech stack you're using in an application. Since I'm developing in Kotlin, you copy the schema that is generated to your mobile application and go from there. So it's not necessary that you have to copy all of them. You can copy the ones that you need. I'm not copying grades there because I'm not using grades in the application at all. But I'm using reviews. But the reviews is not available here. So from where did reviews come? So we'll check. So we'll see there. And another thing is, your cloud schema is a superset of your client schema. So so this is all done, and now I'll go to the mobile application. This is the important ID that we'll be using to make aware our client application to connect to the cloud. So we did the demo, and now we'll go with the. OK. So this is where I copied my schema, restaurant and restaurant address. So this is not there yet. So what I did to create this was, I went to the schema section here. And I added the schema on the cloud from here. This is the same with the address is. I added reviews. So this is going to be a little time taking. So I'll show you how the reviews is created. This is the one I'm using in the current application. So I'll check my application there. Schema. Restaurants. So MongoDB is a BASIN database based on its binary JSON. BASIN allows additional object types which are not available with JSON. So this is where I've created the reviews. I followed the same structure for the address and added the reviews here. Once I created this schema for reviews, I saved the draft. I went back to the SDKs. And here it was the review created. So whatever your use case is, you want to add more classes, you can add those classes on a cloud side, and it will automatically generate the client application schema for you, and you just have to copy that schema on your mobile application, and from there you are good to go. So this is where I copied this. OK, what is our next step here? OK, our next step here is Realm query language. So Realm is a string-based query language. This is a snapshot of the Realm API. The queries are passed to the Realm query engine, retrieving the matching objects from the Realm. So the database can be queried by Realm is a database that lives on the device. So I've used SQLite when I was working in my scholarship projects, and it was a lot of boilerplate code, and then I added Room library on top of that, which is the ORM library, and that kind of solved the boilerplate code, and I could only run select queries with annotations. But with Realm, it's kind of a parallel to a programming language. You have filter operators available, you have comparison operators available, you have search operators available that you can use. It's a flexible database that gives a lot of flexibility for you to define to save your data and persist your data in a way you want. So this is a snapshot of the API in which I am querying in my application, and now I'll come to the Android Studio. This is where you add the dependencies. In the project level file, I'm using the Realm Java plugin. And then on the module level, you apply the Realm Android here. And then you also enable sync because you're using the sync feature. And then rest of this is the Android application framework. So in the login activity, when you define the login screen, you use the Realm login APIs, which I'm going to show you there. Realm offers both synchronous and asynchronous calls. When you're using asynchronous calls, you do not need to have additional background thread in your application. Realm is going to run that call that in the background thread itself. So this is where I'm registering the user using register user async. I'm passing the email password that I'm retrieving from the UI. And once the user is registered, if the user wants to log in, this is the login API. This is calling login async. So it is available in both synchronous and asynchronous calls. And I am not using any background thread. It's going to call the background thread on its own. And once this is built, it's going to go to the next activity where you are selecting the location or cuisines. So what is the next step here is once the user authenticates, you are going to build the sync configuration. Is the size visible or? It's okay? Okay, this is how you define the configuration, what you are going to be calling. So it requires two parameters. One is you're a user that authenticated, and the next is your partition value. This is hard-coded here because I don't have any other city except New York, so I hard-coded the New York value. So once this is built, you open the synchronous realm. So where this is getting open in the onStart method. If you are aware of the activity life cycle, you have to be calling that when the application starts. So onCreate is called first in an Android activity setup. So I created the configuration there, and in the onStart, just before it sets the UI, I call those locations there. So since I used the search location, this is where I'm calling the async method to search all the distinct boroughs there. So here I'm using the Realm API, Realm results.where clause. It looks at whatever the distinct boroughs are available in the Realm database, and it's following all that and it's displaying the list of all those boroughs there. Once you select the location from there, it's going to call, Realm also provides you Realm recycler adapter, so you don't have to even write your custom adapter their code to display the list. You can use the Realm recycler view adapter and pass the Realm results list there, and it will display the list to you on its own. So on selection of the location, this now then goes to the list activity. In the list activity again, this is calling the location that you opened. Display restaurant at location. This is cuisine, and this is at location. With the location, it's calling equal to query. So this is again using the Realm with this API to query the database and get the values to display. So it's finding all those restaurants which is available in the same Manhattan location I selected, and it's going to display the list there. So the list is getting passed to the restaurant adapter. And this is how the restaurant adapter is going to look like. It extends the Android adapter, and you can use the recycle view adapter on its own. It takes the list of type ordered realm collection, and it's going to display the data to you. And once you select the list, it's going to have a click listener there. Once you select what restaurant you want to see, it's going to pass on to the detail activity. Now, detail activity has an add review button. I'm calling this again, and this is I'm going to tell you why this is being called again and again in all the screens. So this has a review button, and the logic of saving the review is here. So review is an embedded object. Embedded object relationships in Realm is defined as the form of embedded objects because that is easily mapped to the MongoDB document model. But the embedded objects cannot be updated without the parent object. It's linked to the parent object there, and I will tell you what errors I found when I was trying to do that. So this is where it's displaying all the address, and this is where it saves the reviews in the database. And then Realm is reactive in nature. As soon as you make the change in the database, it's going to display to the UI. And what makes it reactive? It's the change listeners that makes Realm reactive. You add the change listener to the review, and as soon as you make changes to the data, it's going to display on the UI immediately. So this is the review adapter being used, and yeah. So this is the whole code of the application there. Moving to the next slide. We explored the code on the Android Studio. So what I learned, so these were some of the 3 errors that I got, and I was hoping that I could help the people who are experimenting with a Realm. So what happened was I was calling the configuration twice. It's the same configuration that I'm using. I'm not calling any other partition. I'm only opening one partition, which is defined here. I was calling this variable twice. And then I was passing 2 locations, and then I was passing 2 cuisines. So this is an error. This is not a best practice to follow. You only need to define it once, and you can use the same variable to pass it to both of them. A very basic one, but still a good learning. Next was updating of embedded objects. Thus, I told you, I was trying to update them without attaching it to the parent. It didn't know what restaurant ID it was going to be updated. So that's, again, an illegal exception. Embedded objects cannot be copied by themselves. The next was again so what are managed and unmanaged objects in Realm is, the managed objects are the ones that you retrieve from Realm database. And unmanaged objects are the ones that you just initiate with your constructor call. So say, for example, I retrieved Realm list from the database, but then I am also initiating Realm list constructor and creating a new list out of there, but that is not saved in the database there. So that is an unmanaged. I can either copy to Realm from there, or I cannot use this in the Realm recycler view adapter. It can only be used with managed collections. So to review, what did I do? I created an account, and then I created a cluster, which is done on the realm.mongodb.com. Then I loaded the sample data in the Atlas cluster. I generated the Realm schema using the Realm generate schema utility. And then I used Partition Sync. I defined, I did not define the key there. Okay, once you create this, I kind of missed this part. I'm so sorry about this. So when you enable sync there, you have to go there. You enable sync from here. When you start syncing, this is where you select the partition sync type. You select the cluster from here. I'm not using development mode on, but I can use it, but then I have to switch it off if the application is in production. And then it also gives you the option that you can choose from. You can either use available ones from there. Initially, when I started, I used the burrow option. So now burrow is the location. So now burrow becomes my partition key, and the value of the burrow will be in all those documents, and it will separate those documents based on that value. But what added complexity to this was whatever new class that I would add, or whatever new document or collection I would add, this key has to be there. And burrow will not match to all the use cases that I'm adding in my collection. So I did not use this option. So I defined a new partition key. I created a new partition key there. I chose it the string type. index is important here because when I enable sync there, it's going to sample all those documents that are there in the collection, and it's going to add this field here. I'm not going to make this required because this is going to throw me an error that this is a required field, and I'm not providing any value to this. So what the other way of adding the value to the collections is by using MongoDB shell, by using Mongo shell and using update many query from there. So how I updated all the collections here was I used update many from the Mongo shell, and I added underscore partition is equal to New York in all those documents. So I'm going to show you the collections on this and how the value of underscore partition has got added. Sorry, I missed this point initially. This is a little slow, so I'll carry on. So these are the permissions that are defined. You can either choose the template. This is how the JSON expressions is going to look like. That the user who is authenticating, the partition value is going to be the user.id, and only that user has access to read only the private partitions, private realms, and write to only user-defined partitions there. And this is the user can read all data and write through their own data. So these are the simple templates that are provided to you. But if you have any dynamic permissions to resolve, you can create functions from there. But for this one, I'm not using any template. The user has read and write permissions on the data. It's still loading. I'm sorry about the delay here. So now the sync is enabled, and I can since I did not make this a required field, this is not going to be added in the collections, but here this is going to be a required field. So here, the underscore partition value got added to all the documents. And that is when I open the configuration, it knows that it has to sync all the restaurants that are there in that partition. And the reviews was not added initially, but then when I created the object, it got added. So I will review the steps again. You created the cluster from the Atlas account. Then you created the realm app from the realm section. And then you configured the collections from the schema, choosing the collection that you want. And then you enabled sync from the sync. You chose the partition sync. You provided the partition value. You chose the template or defined the template you wanted. And then you made all the changes to your application and on your device. So you get the offline, you didn't add any REST API or any caching code in your application. That comes out of the box with Realm. And then there is a bidirectional flow from one device to the other device. The sync happens on both sides. So I wanted to thank these two people who are my technical advisors for this application. Christian Melker is Realm Java lead in MongoDB, and John Page is a distinguished engineer at MongoDB. And what are the next steps that could be used? So what I found out about when I created the application was there was repetition of config in every activity. So I'm calling config in that New York activity, then I'm calling it again in the restaurant list activity. So how do I avoid this conflict? So what realm is a single is realm cannot instance cannot be passed across threads. Realm can be accessed only within the thread where it is created. There is an option of having frozen objects, but I kind of did an experiment with that at the moment. So how can I avoid using these multiple times and not initiate in every activity was by using a proper design pattern. So Realm works best when you have a proper architecture of the application. So if there is a model in between, I can use the variable calling from the model. I do not have to define it again and again in every application. So just there's a proper architecture that can help make Realm working with Realm easier. So that was something I learned for this experiment that I created when I created this application. The next was triggers. Now, how do I have my data in the Atlas? What next steps do I want? I added reviews, I synced the reviews, but then my intention was that I want to add friends in my application. So that I can do is with the help of triggers. So there are 3 kinds of triggers that are available: authentication, database, and scheduled. When the user authenticates in the application, you can define a trigger on the cluster there. So where do you define triggers? This is where you define the triggers. So you can add a trigger there. You can choose which trigger you want. I want to go with authentication. You can define the name, what you want. And then you can define when should this trigger be called. I want to call this trigger on login. I'm not using this one. So this will be a function. And then I define a function here. Add a user. So now I can create a user collection additionally, and I can define the logic here to add the user to that collection. So this is something additional I want to achieve on this application. So once that user is added, the list of the users will be there in the user collection. And say, for example, I want to add a friend to my application. So that request, that add a friend, will check that user collection. You will enter the name of the user that you want to add a friend as. It will check if the name is available, and it will add that friend to your list. And then it will send the notification on the other device, the friend that is using that application. He will get the notification that you got added by X person. This is some additional functionality that can be added to the restaurant app. And you can also use GraphQL option. I've not experimented with this. This is something also I'm learning to kind of use and help the community developers who are using this functionality. Atlas search is something which is a part of Atlas, but what I have mentioned here was I found out when I finished this application, I found out that someone used the same data set to create a website. So how this came together, that you have a data in Atlas, then you have a website from the same data set, and then you also created a mobile application with that same data set. So you're syncing between one device to the website and then to another device, having the same data in a central place, which is Atlas. So yeah, I know learning something new is always difficult. So I started this 100 days of code journey, and today is my 96th day. I'm very proud to keep that streak up till 96th day. So I'm more than happy to welcome you all if you want to join the journey with me. And I learned a lot of things on this journey. I learned JavaScript. I learned about backend. I was not familiar with that. I'm mostly an Android developer. And then I learned how I can use this MongoDB to mobile, integrate that application in my restaurant. I kind of did this and all in my 100 days of code only. And this is on the Realm.Mongo community platform. And yeah, happy to share that progress with all. This has been a great learning experience. And this is, I started the Realm Bytes when I worked in the support role, and I kind of have knowledge in deeper, and I came to know what the developers, the community was. Being a community manager, I'm passionate about communities, and I like helping people a lot, and I noticed that there are some concepts that can be made easier for my community. So I started this weekly Realm Bytes to help developers who are starting out with Realm. And if you are interested and if you would want to experiment, you can definitely take a look at this. And if you have any feedback for me, and I'll be more than happy to kind of work with you on this. Thank you for your time. So we still have some time left, and if you have any questions, yeah. Anyone has any question? Were you aware of the Realm? Have you experimented with Realm before? Anyone has used Realm before? So did you know that MongoDB has this option of syncing data to mobile? Once you said a lot of people are working with MongoDB. Does anyone wants to share their experience of using MongoDB? Okay. So I guess that is all. Thank you so much.